Now we start with Russia and Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry has stated that Russian troops have thwarted an attempt by Ukrainian special forces to fly soldiers in via a helicopter to the embattled eastern city of Pokrovsk. The ministry has stated that all 11 Ukrainians aboard the helicopter have been killed. Meanwhile, 2 Ukrainian military sources have stated that Kyiv had landed special forces to fight in parts of Pokrovsk as Moscow said its troops had surrounded Ukrainian contingents. According to Ukrainian media, 250 Russian troops are in Pokrovsk and are engaging in firefights and killing Ukrainian soldiers, particularly drone operations. Operators, according to reports, logistics into the city are fully controlled by Russian drones, forcing Ukrainian soldiers to walk 10 to 15 kilometers to reach their positions. Meanwhile, Ukraine has stated that it is intensifying efforts to defend Pokrovsk, as Kyiv says that the situation in the strategic hub is critical and continues to deteriorate. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has pledged to stop Russian attacks over Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. Let's listen in.
Багато сьогодні було доповідей військових детально по фронту. Звісно, Покровськ. Передусім, ми продовжуємо знищувати окупанта. І це найважливіше. Зупиняти російські удари, як це можливо, і там, де це можливо. Росіяни всю нашу країну хочуть перетворити на те, що вони роблять з Покровськом, роблять з Куп'янськом, іншими нашими містами, нашими громадами. Зупиняти їх треба там, куди вони прийшли. І знищувати там. Я дякую кожному нашому підрозділу, кожному солдату, сержанту та офіцеру, які захищають позиції та захищають нашу державу.
Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry has also stated that it has downed 98 Ukrainian drones overnight. The ministry has further added that 11 drones were destroyed over Moscow region, including 6 that were headed to the Russian capital. Now for this discussion, we welcome Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us again. Good to see you. Thank you. Ben, can you tell us about the importance of, or this particular region, Pokrovsk, and how does this, Pokrovsk, yes, and how does this reported Russian control over the logistics routes in this region impact Ukraine's broader defensive strategy?
It's key. The city is absolutely key. So to understand, it's in the east, it's the front line between the Ukrainian forces and the Russian forces. It's a key nexus of both rail and road. And of course, the fighting in the east has been going on, since the beginning, but particularly the battle for Pokrovsk has been going on for about 8 months. And the importance of it is it's the key logistical hub that supplies the whole Ukraine defense in the Donbass. Putin said repeatedly that he wants to capture the whole of the Donbass. This is his war goal. And then he would be able to declare victory that he could sell to the Russian people and end the war. However, the Ukrainians have been putting up a determined fight and they refuse. It's a red line for Zelenskyy that they won't give back or give to the Russians the Donbass region. And so if Pokrovsk falls, then the supplies to the whole defensive line that Ukrainians battling against the Russians, that might collapse, and we might actually see the war over in the next month if the Russians capture Pokrovsk. So the reports you're mentioning, the situation is critical. It's really bad. The Russians broke into the city. There's been ongoing street battles. I was just reading the reports coming out of Pokrovsk this morning, and it seems that the Russians have captured large parts of the city. They've been clearing out pockets of defense. The fighting is ongoing. And as you mentioned, the Ukrainian special forces flew in a brave operation in a US-made Black Hawk helicopter behind Russian lines. But it appears now, in the last few hours, that those soldiers, the elite troops that they sent in to stabilize the situation, have all been hunted down and killed by Russian drone operators. So the city appears to be on the verge of collapse, of falling to the Russians. And as I said, if it does, then that would trigger or could trigger the collapse of Ukraine's entire defense of of Donbass. And if Russia takes Donbass, then after Pokrovsk, there's nothing defensible all the way up to the Dnipro River, which runs through the middle of the country. And it means that the Russians could occupy the whole of eastern Ukraine up to Dnipropetrovsk, and that would probably trigger a ceasefire and possibly an end to the war.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Ben, so this situation, as you mentioned, it can lead to the end of the war, but is there any other region that has the capability to support Ukraine's defense and Ukraine's capabilities to fight back, to make sure
Yes.
that these Russian forces will not reach to the river that you've mentioned in the middle of Ukraine?
So the strategy on Vankova, on the Ukrainian side, is to try and collapse the Russian economy. And what they've done since the summer is they're taking their new long-distance drones and flying them into Russia and bombing its refineries with some success. They've taken out about 20% of Russia's production. And of course, that provides all the money for Putin to pay for the war. It also brings the war home to Russia to affect regular Russians, because they've been largely unaffected by the war until now. And there's a fuel crisis that's expanding in Russia. And the idea there is to put pressure on Putin, because the economy is doing worse and worse. People are extremely unhappy. Talking to people in Moscow, our contacts in Moscow, and retail sales are collapsing, prices are going shooting up because of incredibly high inflation. And this is why the whole discussion about US-made Tomahawks is so important, because those rockets, those missiles have the range, they can reach to Moscow, they can flatten oil refineries and do permanent damage to the Russian economy. So there's a race between these two stories, between the fall of Pokrovsk on one side and supplying Ukraine with these powerful missiles on the other side, which gives Ukraine finally the ability to collapse the Russian economy. And it's not clear who's going to win out, but Trump has been vacillating on the Tomahawks. He cleared permission to send them, but there's no concrete plan to send any in the short time. And they need them. The Ukrainians need them, like right now. This war is reaching a crisis, a cusp, or a tipping point.
Yes.
And it needs to be resolved, and it could be one way or the other very quickly.
Right. Thank you very much, Ben, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Ukraine's foreign ministry has denounced what it described as Russian attacks on substations critical to supplying external power for Ukraine's nuclear power stations. A foreign ministry statement has issued this week that has stated that Russia has carried out targeted strikes on such substations. The ministry has also stated that the strikes on civilian energy facilities directly affected the safe operation of nuclear installations. The ministry added that the attacks also bore the hallmarks of nuclear terrorism and constituted a grave violation of international humanitarian law. Now for this discussion, we go back to Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Ben, building up on your previous answer about how critical it is for Ukraine to have Tomahawk missiles as soon as possible, how do you analyze the current U.S.'s stance between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, the U.S. under Trump has in effect withdrawn from the war completely. It sent no money whatsoever this year to support the Ukrainian government, nor its military spending. And previously under Biden, they accounted for about 40% of the money. So the whole burden has fallen on the EU, but the EU is in crisis as well. I mean, the French government's already collapsed, and both the British government's not far behind, and the German government deficit's shooting up. And so there's been all this talk about seizing the Russian frozen assets, some 140 billion euros are sitting in Belgium. But that's going nowhere, and without that money, then Ukraine is in real trouble. And The Economist magazine and The Times both run pieces this week saying that if this money doesn't appear, then again, the war could collapse. And you mentioned also the attacks on substations and power. This is the other plank of the Kremlin strategy. It's fighting for Pokrovsk, as a sort of strategic win, but at the same time, it's using its missiles. And this is what the Tomahawks are supposed to counter. Russia has like extremely sophisticated and lots of missiles, and it's using them to take out not just the power stations, but increasingly it's targeting substations, power lines. And already large parts of Ukraine, I think about a third of the regions are already blacked out just as the winter starts. And you can't live in a Soviet-built apartment if it has no power through the winter. And that's Russia's strategy, is basically to freeze the population over the winter in order to get them to turn on the government and call an end to the war. And it's being very effective. These missiles that Russia has are extremely powerful and extremely accurate. And so it's blowing up substations that provide power and heat to the housing faster than Ukrainians can repair them.
And to what extent do you think could Ukraine's claims of nuclear terrorism influence international or diplomatic legal responses and more support towards Russia? No, not Russia, but Ukraine.
Ukraine. The ceasefire talks have basically failed. The last chance was the proposed meeting between Trump and Putin in Budapest, but that was cancelled after Putin basically sent the same demands that he's been sending since the beginning, and has showed that he's not prepared to compromise in any way. And those two demands boiled down to Ukraine has to adopt neutrality and promise never to attempt to join NATO. And the key one was that Putin is insisting that the Ukrainian forces withdraw unilaterally from all of Donbass. So this is why the Pokrovsk battle is so important, because Putin's asking for the Ukrainians to give up and leave Pokrovsk and the defensive line they've built in the Donbass without a fight. And Trump was hoping that Putin would make some sort of compromise there and, cede some territory. And Putin's dug his heels in because he believes he can win, and he is. I mean, the reports from Pokrovsk today are showing that he is winning and that he doesn't need to negotiate because he can get the Donbass purely on a military basis. And so there's no ceasefire talks anymore. We're just going to battle it out and see what happens with the city today.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Ben, for sharing that real-time analysis and insight on this Russia-Ukraine war. Please stay with us as we stay in the region now. In Finland, Armando Mima, a member of Finland's National Conservative Party, the Freedom Alliance, has stated that Russia may request compensation from Europe of around 200 billion euros for financing Ukraine once the conflict is over. The Finnish politician has also noted that peace will remain out of reach until Europeans abandon their arrogance. Earlier, the permanent representatives of European Union member states had agreed to use frozen Russian assets to issue reparation loans to Ukraine. Most of Russia's sovereign assets frozen in Europe are held on the Euroclear platform in Belgium, which totals slightly over 200 billion euros. Now we welcome back Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for staying with us. Ben, now looking at this, what more can you tell us about the comments that just we heard from Armando Mima, and what do you think this reflects? And is there any reality backing to his claims about the fact that Russia could claim money from Ukraine, compensation?
Well, this is a rhetorical battle, and it comes back to, as you said, the need to fund Ukraine, and the EU doesn't have any money to carry on. It needs 100 billion a year for at least the next 3 years in order to keep Ukraine in the game. And the only money available that it could get is to seize these Russian assets, 200 billion in Europe, 300 in total, through these reparation loans. However, that's unprecedented. This money has been frozen, but it hasn't been confiscated. Technically, legally, under European law, it still belongs to the central bank. The central bank has no access to it, but it belongs to Russia. And so if Europe seizes the money, then Russia's going to come with a whole bunch of lawsuits, and banks that actually hold this money, and particularly the government of Belgium, could be on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars in liabilities if the courts find against them. And what Russia's doing now is launching a counterclaim and saying, look, you because its argument is that actually Russia is not fighting Ukraine, it's fighting a proxy war against NATO, and it's been attacked unprovoked in Russian logic by NATO, which has done a lot of damage. And so it's claiming money, reparations, if you like, for damage that NATO has done to Russia. I mean, it won't go anywhere. I don't think any court in the world will hold up that decision, but as I say, the to and fro going on at the moment, there are lots of European countries are very unhappy about the idea of seizing the Russian frozen assets because of all these legal problems, and because it will do massive damage to Europe's reputation as a safe banking center, a place to keep your money. It'll do massive damage to the euro and its reputation as a secure currency. And so they don't want to go there. And Russia's just turning the screws by adding this compensation claim in order to keep the story alive and to point out legal problems, because we journalists will all write about it.
Right. Thank you very much for sharing that insight. That was Ben Aris. He's a journalist joined